Every time we say, oh, that happened years ago, every time we minimize, every time we say it wasn't that bad, we're telling that survivor, your experience wasn't so bad. It was a long time ago, so it doesn't matter. No, no, no. You matter. Whoever it is listening on the other side, you matter. Your story matters. It doesn't matter whether it happened 50 years ago or yesterday. You are powerful. You have a voice. That's what I'm trying to say to every survivor out there.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. I'm glad you're here. You've just tuned into one of the most important podcasts that you may ever listen to, because the purpose of this podcast is to provide a safe space for victims and survivors of rape and sexual assault to share their stories and connect with others who've been through similar experiences. However, there are other important aspects to this podcast: community, education, and support. I believe that sharing our stories is one of the most important steps to healing, and my hope is that the SAS podcast will help victims and survivors feel less alone and more empowered. And my ultimate goal is to provide all of my listeners with insights, resources, and a supportive space where empathy, compassion, and understanding thrive. My commitment is to being there for all my listeners. I'm your host, Dave Markel, coming to you from the Podvlog studio in St. George, Utah, and I'm here each week talking to victims and survivors or interviewing experts and professionals in order to not only gain insights and information to help us on our healing path, but also to provide an education on being trauma-informed, working to help bring justice to victims and survivors of rape and sexual assault. Whether you're aware of it or not, we all know someone whose life has been impacted by rape or sexual assault. So I encourage everyone to listen to this podcast. Whatever your experience is with rape or sexual assault, you are not alone, and we are all here for each other. Thank you again for being here. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. This is episode 96, and this week I'm honored to introduce to you my guest, Melissa Fairchild. Melissa is a strong survivor of rape and sexual assault who, from early adolescence through her adult life, has suffered from the impacts of the crimes committed against her. Yet, Melissa found the internal fortitude and resilience to confront her difficult and painful past, to persevere and push herself into a healing journey. That journey continues, of course, but Melissa is in a place today where she anticipates providing help and healing to others who have also endured through the traumas of rape and sexual assault. She is a true inspiration, and I feel privileged that she reached out to me with the intent of sharing her experiences. Here's Melissa Fairchild. Melissa, thank you for joining me. It is truly a pleasure and an honor to have you with me today.
Thank you.
Melissa reached out to me via an email. She contacted me, we've had conversations and been in touch. This is a long time coming, though, because I think we started communicating in early May. Yes. And just because of schedule conflicts and things that come up, this is finally the time we get to spend together to record this episode. Thank you for your patience. Melissa, would you be willing to tell us a little bit about your background and your history?
Yes, I've lived in the same town all my life, and I am a single mom. I've been a single mom for 21 years. I have 3 beautiful children. Something about me that you'll need to know as I start talking is my faith is a big foundation of who I am. It's not always the firmest foundation. It's been a little shaky, but I have been a preacher's kid for most of my life. So 4 decades plus, I won't give my age. It's a little bit about me.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. I was brought up in a family where a faith-based foundation was a big part of what I grew up with. So yeah, that makes perfect sense to me, especially in this realm of talking about difficult things and having an anchor or some sort of a spiritual support system to rely on and actually feed from is an important aspect. So yeah, I respect that and appreciate you mentioning that. Melissa, what are you able to tell us about your sexual assault experience?
I was brought up in a small trailer park, and this is the background for everything horrible in my life. But I was about 12, and it was this neighborhood full of lively boys and one girl, and that was me. And I had my Huffy bike, and I would race up and down the streets with the boys and whatever. And one day, I was running through one of their houses. We ran through each other's houses all the time. And the little boy that I was chasing, younger than me, he ran in the front door and out the back door, but his dad stopped me in the middle. And I remember he just stopped me. And all of a sudden, he had his hands in my pants and up my shirt and his tongue in my mouth. And I was like, what is this? And I had that whole freeze moment that you talk about so often. And I'm like, what is happening right here? And all of a sudden, I just in my brain, I heard run. And I just ran and I ran back to my house and I think I hid in my closet. I think I was there and I just was terrified. Didn't know what this was. As I said, I was a preacher's kid. So we had vacation Bible school in my double wide trailer. I was the pastor's kid. And so there wasn't a lot of education, I guess, or a lot of TV that I would see about anything sexual. It just didn't happen. And so it was a complete shock to me, especially because I knew this man. He was my next door neighbor. So there was another neighbor that moved in a few months later, and he was known to sexually assault both of his girls. In fact, they would come over at night begging for a place to stay. It was just a bad environment. Both of them cornered me, brought me into their trailer, and had me take pictures. I don't remember very much about this. I find it in fragmented memories of having to be exposed, taking pictures, and just being terrified. I also remember that this man's trailer burned down. I came home from school one day. There was just ashes where the trailer was. The rumor was that he had had an affair with somebody, and that guy came and burned his trailer down. And with my limited mindset at age 12, I was thinking, okay, did what I did with him, was that an affair? Like, I was so confused, but I was terrified that my house would be next to be burned down. And I lived with that fear and the nightmares. And after that, I started going staying with my grandmother's on the weekends because that's when he was around more often. And I went to my grandmother's and I never told anybody. And actually, until 2 weeks ago, I never told my folks. I finally was able to tell them. And part of it is that I knew that I was coming on your show. I knew that we were going to talk about it. I had this boldness. You know what? I'm almost 50. It's time to tell my story. The next assault that happened, same trailer park, but there was a boy closer to my age that moved in across the street. He liked me and my sister. Later, I found out that the first one to kiss him was the one that was going to be his girlfriend. I was there all the time, so I became his girlfriend. And what that meant was that he sexually assaulted me every day. He would force me to do oral on him. He would force me, and I'm talking about painfully forcing me to do these things. And he ended up raping me. Again, never told anybody. I didn't even tell my sister. I just didn't tell anybody. There were threats from the guy next door, from the guy across the street. Don't tell anybody, I'll tell your dad. That was the big deal. I'm going to tell your dad. Dad was the preacher, and that was a big threat. Good girls don't do this. Good girls aren't sexually active or whatever. This was not sexually active. This was abusive. So there's that. I think at that point, I was 13. We moved up the street to a bigger trailer, better part of this trailer park, if there was a better part. It was like you see in the movies. It was just horrible. I was more like 16, so probably a junior in high school, liking guys. And I went on a date with this guy. I think he was a guitarist in a band, but it wasn't a date. It was, I'm taking you to my house. They had this big barn thing. It's funny what you remember and what you don't. I just remember being in a loft in a barn. And I remember there was hay. And I remember there was also some kind of smell of oil or gasoline. I think they had four-wheelers and that kind of thing. I remember this guy wanting to make out. And I thought we were going to go to dinner. This wasn't what we were supposed to be doing. We were supposed to be going to dinner. That's what he told my dad. That's what, we were going to dinner. And he ended up raping me. And then before I could leave, I remember there were stairs down and I couldn't get to the stairs fast enough. Like, can you just please take me home? We were in the middle of nowhere. So I had no idea how to get home from there. And he said, before you can go, you have to sleep with my brother. You have to have sex with my brother, is what he said. His brother was mentally retarded. His brother went to school with me, and I have such compassion. And that's hard to live with, but it's not something that, it was forced on me. It haunts me. That moment haunts me. I wanted to go home where it was safe. But in order to go home where it was safe, I had to go through this hell, this extra layer of hell. So there was that. The next week, I was home, and the rule was at the house at 16, you don't bring people home. You don't bring boys home. If you do, we're home, the whole thing. Well, this guy, same guy, came over, knocks on the door, and I open the door, and he grabs the door and opens it. And he comes in, and I'm like, look, no, what are you doing here? Why are you here? And then he brings in 5 grown men. Now, he's my age, or probably a grade older, but he brought in 5 adult men and wouldn't let me out of my room until they all did various things to me, whatever it was that was their thing. I remember there were panels on the walls that were ugly in this trailer. They were just ugly. And I remember I was at home ec that year. And so I took spray glue and sprayed those walls, and I put batting and pretty sheets. There were rosebud sheets. And that was my project for home ec. And you had to take a picture and show what your home ec project was. That's the only thing that I can remember from that day was those rosebud sheets. I remember bits and pieces of things. I remember one of the men, he looked at me and he said, "You're prettier than my wife, and I love you." And that stuck with me. That still sticks with me. Because if that's what love is, and I know it's not, I'm an educated woman, I'm smart, I have a heart, I know that's not what love is. But somehow that's ingrained. If that's what love is, I don't want it. Because then love hurts. And that's been a big obstacle, even more than overcoming 5 men and the thing that the guy did the week before with him and his brother. Those things stick with me. I think I'm going to stop there. I have a couple more incidences as an adult, but I think I need to stop there for a second.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good to take a break in situations like this. I appreciate the fact that you recognize that you needed a break. Melissa, I do want to say that I am so terribly sorry for the experiences that you've had, horrific experiences, and wonder if you've ever had any empathic response from anyone in your life up to now that has empathized and spoken to you about this in either therapy or some sort of safe place where you felt like you could express and tell of your experiences. Or is this the first time you've ever had the opportunity to explain what has happened to you?
Well, nobody has been as empathetic as you. Thank you. Thank you.
That makes me sad. But yes, I think it's an important aspect of communicating.
I did have a couple of really great therapy moments that I would like to share. And one having to do with EMDR. And one having to do with play therapy. And I don't know if this helps, if this helps your audience or what, or if it's important to this conversation, but I did have therapy when I finally started remembering this because I stuffed it for a while.
Yeah.
I got married. I was married for 8 years, and then he left. He got someone pregnant during our marriage. And then I went back to school, and I got my master's and bachelor's as a single mom. That's something I'm really proud of.
Yeah.
But through all that, I got more confident. Somehow I decided I needed to deal with the traumas in my life. So I found this therapist, and she said, let's role play this moment with the five guys. And she set up her office. She was like, okay, this part of the office is going to be like the couch where they were all sitting. This will be your bedroom over here. And she put, I don't know, a divider, a trash can or something. And she said, I want you to see if you can enter this room and interact. She was trying to get me to be emotional because I was completely shut down in every way, completely shut down. And I don't know. And I think I was just silent. I didn't want to go there. And I remember the first time just emotionally that I reacted was she said, okay, I'm going to be you and I'm going to go into this part that we've called your bedroom. And I started crying and I may have shouted, which is unlike me. It's like, you can't go in there. You can't go in there. She was like, why can't I go in there? And I was like, it's not safe. She's not safe. And she was like, who's not safe? And I was like, the girl. I couldn't even put myself with that. And finally I said, Melissa, she's not safe. It's not okay. And I was tugging her at this point. I don't know if you're supposed to tug on your therapist, but it's like, get out of there. Like,
Yeah.
you gotta come back. And it was at that moment that I was, wow, because I didn't ever feel worth anything. But I realized I had this immense worth beyond what had thought before. She's just not safe. And that was a good moment. And then we played with some little bean bags, and she was like, I need you to make these guys, and I need you to throw them down the hall. And so I remember throwing these bean bags when I was yelling expletives.
Yeah.
You know, but it felt so good. I was like, that release of emotion. So that was one time. And another was recent, probably about a year ago. I finally found EMDR therapy, and it's really changed the course of my life. The first time we did EMDR therapy, she said, what's your target image? And I said, we were working through the first guy when I was 12, and I ran through his house and he stopped me. We were working through that moment. It's what we were working on. She said, what's your target image? And I said, it's a door frame. I just remember the door frame. She goes, okay, what is the false belief and what is it that you want to believe? And the false belief is always, I'm not lovable. I'm not good enough. And what I want to believe is, I'm good enough. I'm lovable. I have worth. So we went in and she did tapping. Some people have done EMDR where you hold two things and it goes off in either hand like a little buzz. But this time she was doing tapping, and I would close my eyes and she said, okay, what do you see? You know, after we came out of the first little tapping session. And I was like, I just see that he's there, but there's somebody behind him. And she was like, all right, let's go back into the tapping session. Okay. So close my eyes again. And this time it was like a warrior angel. That's what I saw in there. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I heard this word run. And I really think it's Jesus. I don't know what other people believe, but that's okay. I really think Jesus was behind him communicating with this angel. And I think it was him that said run, because I remember I heard run in my mind, and I did. And so we finished the session. She said, let's go a little bit more. Let's tap a little bit more. I was like, okay. And she goes, what do you see now? What's the image? And I said, it's burned. Whenever I look, as I close my eyes and think about the image, it's just a burned door frame. And I was like, oh yeah, that house burned. She was like, yeah. And then we went into it again. And all of a sudden, I saw flecks of coins and glass. And I do remember that after the fire, my brother would go over and pick up all the coins. I remember we washed a bunch of coins. I mean, they weren't doing anything with the property. And he would go take the coins, and I would find pretty rocks and glass and whatever else. And it was just a picture to me. And it's what sticks with me is everything else can be burned away. All of this trauma to me is burned away. And what remains is that which is precious, which is me. Melissa is precious. You don't go in there. It's all of that moment came back to me, and I was like, wow, okay. And that sticks with me out of therapy.
It sounds, as you're talking about this, to me that you are experiencing now some very positive thought processes about yourself and about the actual importance of therapy and how it's impacted your life. Can you talk about some of the impacts, though, before you started therapy, how the sexual assaults and rapes impacted you in your daily life? What kinds of experiences did you have in terms of trying to keep that at bay and keeping that out of your daily life, if you did? What was that like?
I mentioned I got married right after high school, and I believe this really impacted my marriage more than I've ever let on. I would wake up in nightmares, and then I didn't want to be intimate with my husband. I didn't want anybody to touch me, and I would wake up with thoughts of all of the things that I've said. It impacted those kind of things. It impacted my weight. I was pretty well a normal weight until all of these things. I don't want anybody to look at me. I want to be invisible. Right now, I'm really fighting that weight loss battle, but I wonder how much of this has affected everything in my body. The body keeps the score and all that. I wonder where that trauma is. Even now, I have gut issues. I have stomach issues. I wonder, and it's a lot. I've been in the hospital this year with stomach issues. And I wonder where that's stored. And I want to do some more research. How does it reverse that? Because I can eat well and walk daily and not seem to overcome whatever it is that my body's holding on to. And I'm so ready to release it because now, look at me. Now I find my worth and I'm finding these positive things. And I'm at a point where I want to feel better and be better. So it's affected my marriage. It's affected my health, my weight, a lot of confidence, self-confidence issues. I've been at the job I'm in for 5 years, but for the first 2 years, I got my master's in tech writing. I'm a tech writer. But for the first 2 years, I would sit in meetings and I couldn't speak up. I didn't want to be seen. I didn't want to be heard. I want to fade into the background. Don't look at me. If you look at me, something bad might happen to me. And I don't need any more trauma in my life. I've had way too much. Some of those are the ways that it's affected me.
Okay. Yeah. Do you recall any type of coping mechanisms that you employed, things that you did to try and get rid of those memories?
Drinking was a part of my life for a while, especially after the divorce, because then there was that added trauma of the divorce. And then I felt more alone. And so I would drink. I was also promiscuous. I didn't really care who I was with. And part of it is after the divorce, I was a good wife and I was such a good, I am a good mom. And I thought if he could do what he did and get away with what he got away with, why do I bother? Am I making sense? If I'm trying to do all the right things and other people don't do the right things and nothing bad happens to them and everything bad's happening to me, why don't I just do bad things? I stopped caring. I really stopped caring because at that point, it was trauma upon trauma upon trauma. And I can't cope with this anymore. I do dissociate. I see myself from outside myself. I can see myself in the room. I don't engage. Probably up until 2 or 3 years ago, I wasn't engaged in a conversation. I would be there, present, but I could see the conversation happening and I could see myself sitting there because I didn't want to get close with people because people hurt me.
Yeah.
People are painful. Other ways, I've had 2 long distance relationships with people who were completely unavailable because I want that closeness with somebody, but I don't want that closeness with somebody because it hurts. I have a strong faith and I have a strong value and I believe in marriage. I think marriage is a good thing. I think, why I would date unavailable, and by unavailable, I mean married or separated men. Why do I do that? I'm putting this distance and it's probably, I just don't want any more trauma, but also that adds trauma because it's not healthy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I think it's important for you to talk about that in the sense that there are people in my audience who can very much relate to what you're talking about. And I can't thank you enough for being willing to share this stuff. This is critically important. Melissa, if I could take you back to those times when the assaults had happened, you said there were others after that. Are you able to tell us more about sexual trauma that you experienced after high school?
Yeah. So whenever I was going to see a lawyer to get divorced, I wasn't ever planning on getting a divorce. That just wasn't in my vocabulary. And all of a sudden, here I am, and this other woman's pregnant. And I met somebody that was online was brand new back then.
Mm-hmm.
I've been a single mom for 21 years. So online was brand spanking new. There was somebody in a chat room. Chat rooms used to be the big thing. And I met somebody and they were like, oh yeah, I've been a lawyer or whatever, and I can give you some free legal advice. And if you want to meet for coffee or whatever. Of course, now I'm thinking 21 years later, that was a horrible idea. Melissa, don't go. But I went and it was in a different town. GPS wasn't what it was. It was different. So I go to this place that he said to go to, and there was no coffee shop there. So I call and I was like, I can't find the place. And he was like, well, there's this park around the corner. I'm like, okay, you want me to meet you there? And he was like, and then I'll follow you, to whatever. He was like, yeah. And then I get there and he calls and says, why don't you hop in the car? I'm on a work call. So I go around to the passenger side of his SUV and open the door, and he has all of this laptop and his work papers all piled on the seat. And he said, just sit in the back. I'll be off this call in a minute. And it sounded official. It sounded like a case he was working on. Who knows? Maybe it was another victim. I don't know. Anyway, he came through the middle. There was no console there. I was sitting in the back and he put his hand around my neck. He called me fat and ugly. And he said, nobody else is going to do this for you. And he raped me. He said, nobody else is going to want to be with you. So I'm in this moment already of I'm about to meet my dad and a lawyer to discuss this divorce. And now I got to go in there. And I've just been assaulted. I have no idea who this person is. I did try to find him. I did look it up. And of course, his account, his profile thing was gone. And there was no way to find out. But my dad immediately knew something. I walked into the lawyer's office and they were gracious enough to pay for everything, the lawyer fees and whatever. Great support. But Dad was like, what's wrong? What, are you okay? And I was like, yeah, I'm good, giving him the smile. Dad's no. And I was like, no. 2 years later, he said, what happened to you that day? And I told him, and he was like, I thought so. I thought so. Then I did file papers. And like I said, I was drinking. Drinking was my coping mechanism. When the girls would go to their dads for the weekend, I would go drink. And I was at a party and at a place I'd never been to before. And all of a sudden, everybody left but me and the host. And he said, let's sit on the couch and have a drink. And I don't remember the next little bit. I remember waking up in pain in his loft and finding my way out of there. I know I drove home, but I'm sure that I drove under that influence of whatever drug that was that he gave me. And after that, I quit drinking. I remember about 2 weeks later, I got myself together. I was living with my folks while I was trying to get on my feet again. And I was like, it's time. And we got an apartment and I got back on my feet and I went back to school and got my bachelor's. And then my son came in the middle of my bachelor's. I had my son and then my master's. But those were the times as an adult that I was assaulted.
Yeah. Melissa, again, I'm just so terribly sorry for the experiences that you've had. They sound very, very difficult to have experienced, but also to then try to heal from and move past. They make such an impact on our lives when we experience these types of things. And everybody's story is so individual and so unique. I hear that in yours too. But then there's those commonalities that I think are so important for others to hear so that they don't feel alone and isolated. So I can't thank you enough for your willingness to be here and to express your experiences and talk about them as openly and as courageously as you are. Melissa, are you able to talk some about what got you to the point of reaching out to me? How did you decide that it was time for you to tell your stories?
So whenever I reached out to you, it was right after I had gone to Tulsa to a friend, and I live in Texas. So I drove up to Tulsa to a friend's conference at her church, and she is a survivor as well. And she had put on a conference at this church, and I think 100 people signed up, and only 30 women came. And I think that's important to say because there's a lot of people that want to heal. This conference was just for sexual abuse survivors, and to give some tips on how do you move forward. There was a panel of people that were going to talk, and they did a great job. But there's so many people out there that want to heal, that signed up to come heal. But I feel that part of the low attendance was a lot of people aren't ready. But I went to my friend's conference, and it was amazing. I needed to know that there were other people. It was so good to see other women and other women of faith that were like, me too. Let's bravely move forward together. There were some hard stories. And so it made me want to do a couple of things. One is heal. The other is I'm a writer, and I want to write about this in some way. I don't know if it's a blog or a book, but I'm a writer and a poet, and that's it. It's about to happen. It's coming. So get ready.
Yeah, great.
And the other thing, I met an aunt on the way home. She's just a step aunt, or it's a difficult relationship, but she asked me, did I know about some things that had happened in our family with some people? I'm going to protect people right now, but
Sure.
there were some situations in our family. And she said, did you know about so-and-so and so-and-so? And I said, well, I do now because you just confirmed everything that I thought. Because this person, when we were children, it was a cousin. This person told me these things, and I didn't understand them. But as an adult, and now that you bring them up, now I understand. I said, I've always had a weird feeling about this person that you were talking about. And she said, yeah, there's a reason for that. And she said, there's a reason about when you were about 6 or 7, I stopped having you come over to spend the night. And I was like, wow, okay, so did this person do something to me? And I remember bits and pieces of things as a kid that sort of may add up to that, but I don't have a strong memory. So I'm not going to say that actually happened, but I say that to say, even if it happened around you, it still affects you. It affects the whole family. This kind of thing in families affects everybody. And so from there, I had a 2-hour trip back to Texas from where I was meeting with my aunt, and I found your podcast, and I couldn't stop listening. And I was like, oh my gosh, just like there's other people at the Tulsa conference, there's other people that are telling their stories, and I'm not alone. And all of a sudden, I just wanted to help other people. And so that's when I emailed you and said, I think I'm ready to tell my story. So when can we do this? So.
I think it's so important that you shared that. I truly am appreciative of the way you found me, but also how you are so willing to reach out to others with that ultimate goal of helping someone else who's been through similar experiences. Everybody's story is different, but there are those commonalities. And I think what really hits home listening to you talk about that is the fact that that's what this podcast is all about, is helping each other. And so those other episodes that you were listening to made you realize, hey, maybe telling my story could also help someone else.
Yeah.
I know for a fact it will, because that's been the history of this show. That's what's happening. Yeah. It's critically important in the process of healing to get to the point where you can talk about your experiences, even if it's just skimming the top. And you did more than skimming the top. You've told some very, very deep, personal, painful experiences. But I think that is so important for other people to hear and to know that they aren't alone also.
Yeah.
This is huge. Thank you so much.
I think there's one more thing, if you'll allow me. There's
Absolutely.
one more thing that's important to me, and it's been on my mind lately, and I know it's been in the news lately. I live in an area of North Texas where there's a big church that I won't name that a lot of people that I know go to. And it's been in the news that there was a sexual assault of a 12-year-old years ago. And so I've watched this play out on social media with people that I know that go to this big church. And we got to change the conversation. And here's why. The conversation was not about, dang it, there's a 12-year-old that was hurt and is still hurting even though she's 50. That's not the conversation we were having or that I was seeing. The conversation was, how do we protect the church? How do we protect the pastor? And this could happen in business. This could happen wherever else.
Yeah.
But it triggered me. And I want somebody to know that whenever I'm hearing this story in the news, it triggered me because I was 12 when this happened and I'm 49. There are days that it stops me in tears.
Yeah.
It didn't just happen. Every time we say, oh, that happened years ago, every time we minimize, every time we say it wasn't that bad, we're telling that survivor, your experience wasn't so bad. It was a long time ago, so it doesn't matter. No, no, no. You matter. Whoever it is listening on the other side, you matter. Your story matters. It doesn't matter whether it happened 50 years ago or yesterday. You are powerful. You have a voice. That's what I'm trying to say to every survivor out there. But we've got to change the conversation and stop protecting these predators.
Yeah. It's critical. It's so
And I'm on a
important.
mission.
Yeah, you should. And I appreciate your mission. It means everything to me, especially since you've been willing to go public and use this platform to express that mission. I totally 100% agree with you. We have to change the focus. We have to change the conversation. And having the conversation that you and I are having right now and that other people have come on this show and had with me is exactly what needs to happen. We need to talk about this more. We need to normalize the conversation about rape and sexual assault so that people do feel empowered and more confident in coming forward. But the other part of that is exactly what you said. We have to stop protecting predators. That doesn't mean every predator needs to go to jail. That doesn't mean every predator needs to be publicly shamed. What it means is that we need to bring justice to victims and survivors by pointing out who these predators are. Because if they've sexually assaulted or raped one, there is a very high probability that they've sexually assaulted or raped others.
True.
We need to bring that out. We need to say this person did this, and that person should have some sort of accounting for that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I totally agree with you. We've covered so much. I really am grateful. I can't emphasize that enough. You know, from hearing this podcast and listening to multiple episodes, because you told me when you first started that when you started listening to the podcast, you just couldn't stop. But it's my common practice to ask my guests, what will you do now after you've brought all of this out? And some of those memories, even while you were expressing them just now, it was obvious that it's made an emotional impact, that there's still some deep hurt. If you've heard me talk about the neuroscience of the brain and what trauma does, you know that talking about memories that you know you have can activate memories that you didn't know you have. And so these memories come to the forefront of your thought process, sometimes out of the blue. Sometimes it'll happen tomorrow or the next day or a week from now. And you'll think back to your conversation for this episode and some other memory will pop into your mind. What can you tell me you will be doing to take care of yourself and to handle some of those after interview type intrusive thought processes, how will you take care of you?
We'll keep going to therapy. I will. Between the time that we started talking and now, I fired my therapist and got a new one. And I say that because it's okay. Maybe somebody else needs to hear, if they're not for you, then you need to fire them. You know, so, and I found somebody that is fantastic in introducing me to new techniques like flash technique and, more EMDR and things like that. So I'll be doing that. Also, writing is helpful. And I mentioned that I'm on a weight loss journey because I finally found my self worth. And so I'll be walking, probably listening to your podcasts. I'm going to be reaching out to my friend in Tulsa, seeing if we can do a joint, if I can be on the panel, or if we can do a joint venture here in Texas. Let's have a retreat. Let's have a couple of days where we talk about this and give a safe place for people to tell their stories. So that's what I'll be doing.
Excellent. Wow. Melissa, that sounds amazing. I especially want to go back to the point that you made about changing therapists. And I think, I know I've heard some of my guests say this before, are that they don't feel comfortable with their therapist, but they also don't feel comfortable in letting that therapist know that they need to move on to a different therapist, because it's hard, it's embarrassing, it's awkward.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think what's important is that people learn to take care of themselves in that therapeutic setting. And if you do not feel like you're making progress, or if you feel like the person that you're getting therapy from isn't as trauma informed or isn't as informed about sexual assault and rape as you would hope that they were, then yes, by all means, it doesn't have to be harsh. It can be gentle. Just tell that person, look, this isn't working for me. I don't think we are a good connection, and I would like to end our sessions, and I'm going to find someone else that I might feel more comfortable with. I also want to emphasize too that it might be a good idea before you even start therapy, if you're looking for a therapist, to ask those questions of your therapist. How do you view what it means to be trauma informed, especially with regard to rape and sexual assault? And do you have any specific training in doing therapy with victims of rape and sexual assault? Are you familiar with the dynamics? Are you familiar with perpetrator mentality? And are you familiar with dissociation? And you'd be surprised at how many therapists haven't had even the book knowledge of some of these terms that I talk about a lot, which is the neuroscience of trauma and the dissociative effects and some of the ways that the body responds based on trauma and fear. And there's a lot of therapists out there who don't know anything about tonic immobility or collapsed mobility and some of the things that victims go through. So all that to say that it is important to do a little bit of research before you start therapy. But again, if you do, even if somebody has all of that knowledge and you aren't feeling like you're making the progress you need to be making, or that it's not going where you thought it would, it's not wrong or bad to drop your therapist and go with someone else. So I appreciate you mentioning that.
That's exactly what I did. I Googled trauma-informed, trauma therapy, EMDR. These are the things that worked for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I found, and it was a guy therapist, actually. I've never had a man therapist before, but it's a good fit.
Good.
It's good.
Glad to hear that. And the other thing that you mentioned that I'm wildly excited about is your thought process of getting with your friend in Tulsa and maybe starting a little retreat or some sort of conference of your own to do more of what you experienced there before. I think it's a marvelous idea. And I can honestly say more power to you. I hope that happens because it is extremely therapeutic and extremely cathartic to help other people. It helps yourself when you're helping other people. And
For sure. It helps to know you're not alone.
Yeah. I'm glad you recognize that. Yeah. Melissa, is there anything else that you'd like to say to the audience or that you'd like to discuss before we close up this episode?
I don't think so. Thank you for letting me tell my stories. Thank you. It's healing. Thank you for being part of my healing journey. And this will continue. And I would just encourage, people who have experienced this, and also people who know people that have experienced this. It's okay to get help, and you're not alone. These are the words that I want to say. It's okay to get help. You are not alone.
Truer words couldn't be spoken. I can't thank you enough for your courage and tenacity and desire to come on this show and tell your stories. You did such an amazing job. And
thank you.
I know you're going to touch thousands of people who will hear this episode, not only when it's released, but through time, into perpetuity, because it's going to be out there for a long time. I'm really glad that you decided to take this step and to join me on this episode. Melissa, thanks. I do want to stay in touch. I appreciate you being part of the SAS family, and I look forward to maybe even doing another episode sometime down the line, and checking in with you and seeing how that therapy is going, and seeing if you did maybe do a little conference or some sort of retreat, and if so, how that turned out. So let's keep in touch.
Yes, let's.
Okay. Thanks, Melissa. We'll talk to you again soon.
That does it for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. It was a true pleasure having Melissa Fairchild as my guest this week, and now I think you understand why. In spite of the horrendous violations and traumas that Melissa endured, she has become a strong survivor who has the vision of helping others through this episode and her vision of putting together survivor retreats in the future. Thank you, Melissa. It was an honor having you on the show, and I'm looking forward to watching your success in helping others. I also want to give a shout out to you, my listeners. Because of you, this show continues to grow and is reaching thousands of people who are benefiting from listening to the inspiring and uplifting experiences of victims and survivors, and also from the experts and professionals who appear on this show to bring insights and education on what it means to be trauma-informed, as well as the intricacies of the neuroscience of trauma and memory. This show is for everyone, and I'm thrilled that you join me each week. Please share this podcast with everyone you know, and be sure to subscribe and rate this show. It's a great way to help bring justice to victims and survivors of rape and sexual assault. Another way is to start by believing when it comes to listening to and supporting victims and survivors, because we all know someone whose life has been impacted by rape or sexual assault. Be sure to join me next Tuesday for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. We'll see you next week.